What we've seen this week at the University of Glasgow is not protest. It's the public glorification of mass murder. When masked students stood beneath the cloisters of that historic university with a banner reading "Glory to our martyrs," they were not engaged in legitimate dissent, nor even in ill-judged solidarity with the people of Gaza. They were praising Hamas, a proscribed terrorist organisation under UK law, and an organisation that actually conducted one of the most appalling terrorist attacks 2 years ago. The organisation responsible for the butchery of October the 7th, the murder of 1,200 Israeli civilians, the rape of women, the mutilation of corpses, the abduction of children. The British state has been explicit since 2021. Hamas in its entirety, not merely its military wing, is a terrorist group under the Terrorism Act 2000. It's an offence, therefore, to invite support for it, display its symbols, or in any way glorify its actions. That is the law, and it's there for good reason, because terrorism is not a side in a political debate, it's an act on humanity itself. It is therefore incomprehensible that students can gather under the protection of an academic institution, chant slogans of praise for Al-Aqsa flood, Hamas's own name for the October the 7th massacre, and then go home unchallenged by the police. How is it that Palestine Action, an activist network accused of vandalising property, has seen arrests, prosecutions and injunctions, while those explicitly expressing support for a terrorist atrocity are still at liberty? The inconsistency is intolerable. So let me be clear. One can, indeed one must, support Palestinian civilians under siege in Gaza, demand an end to starvation and call for lasting peace. That is not only legal but morally essential. But there is an absolute line between opposing Israeli government policy and venerating the killers of Israeli children, and that line was crossed when Glasgow students celebrated October the 7th as a moment of glory. The same distinction, I think, should be drawn publicly and firmly between a political movement for Palestine rights and a movement that celebrates terrorism. The first deserves compassion and dialogue, the second deserves arrest and prosecution. Because when we blur that line, we erode the moral foundation of democracy itself. Some will say these students are naive, that they've confused grief for Gaza with hero worship of its tormentors. Perhaps. But ignorance is no defence in law, and it's a pitiful excuse in ethics. Universities are meant to be the guardians of reason, the custodians of intellectual integrity, and when students hide behind keffiyehs and masks, chanting slogans of violence, they are not exercising academic freedom, they are debasing it. The University of Glasgow has said it will investigate. That's welcome but insufficient. The police should already have been involved. The Home Office defines encouragement of terrorism as speech or action that glorifies a terrorist act in such a way that it might encourage imitation. The threshold was plainly met. What message does it send to Jewish students, many of whom now feel unsafe in campus, when those who praise the slaughter of Jews are defended as activists for justice? What message does it send to Palestinians when their legitimate struggle for dignity is hijacked by people who equate terrorism with liberation? There is at heart a dangerous moral inversion at work. Compassion for the people of Gaza should lead one to condemn Hamas, not celebrate it, because Hamas's rule has been the chief instrument of Palestinian misery, hoarding aid, executing dissenters, and using civilians as shields. To glorify its violence is to abandon the very Palestinians one claims to defend. Let's remember also that free speech is not absolute when it crosses into criminality. The same legal framework that protects the right to protest also protects society from the incitement of terror and hatred. A protest that praises a prescribed group is not free expression, it's the abuse of that freedom. And in the face of this, the response from political leaders has been correct in tone, if timid in enforcement. Sir Keir Starmer was right to call such protests un-British. The Education Secretary and the Office for Students are right to say universities risk sanction. But there must be more than warnings, there must be accountability. Arrests should follow when individuals glorify terrorism in this way. And there's a wider context. Britain's Jewish citizens are still in mourning after the synagogue killings in Manchester. For such a community to watch university students on the same weekend chanting praise for the perpetrators of another massacre is beyond indecency. It's cruelty disguised as activism. We can and we should call for an end to the siege of Gaza, for the relaxation of aid restrictions, for the genuine peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. But that humanitarian concern cannot coexist with the glorification of Hamas. Supporting Palestinians means rejecting Hamas absolutely. To tolerate the celebration of terror is to betray both Israel and Palestine. It's to side with barbarism against humanity, and unless universities and police forces act decisively, we risk normalising a culture in which the murder of civilians becomes just another slogan. In addition, of course, the fact that the elderly can be arrested for holding cardboard signs when the youth in Glasgow University are tolerated supporting specifically an act of terror which was well documented is simply something that leaves me grasping for words. I can barely articulate it. The moral test of our democracy is whether we have the courage to distinguish freedom from fanaticism, and those who support Hamas have chosen the latter, and they should face the full force of the law.